Sly 2 Band of Thieves was an excellent platformer that really put Sly on the platformer map, and personally it's one of my favorites of all time. But he was still sorta left in the shadows behind Ratchet and Jack, though he still totally showed that he can definitely run and jump with the big boys. So only a year later we got another sequel to round off the trilogy, with Honor Among Thieves released in late 2005. And what Sucker Punch delivered was another grand adventure with Sly, the Cooper Gang, and a bunch of new faces, resulting in yet another epic adventure. It doesn't quite top Band of Thieves in my opinion, but it's still a strong game nonetheless. So let's get this started. Honor Among Thieves picks up right where Band of Thieves left off, though you wouldn't really know it right at the start. As soon as you pick New Game, Sly is on another heist, this time with a bunch of new partners that are, at first, unknown, to stop this new evil monkey, Dr. M, from opening the Cooper Vault, which holds all the treasures from the Cooper family that they picked up throughout the ages. And you can definitely tell Dr. M is evil. He built a full-on fortress surrounding the vault, a bunch of drills that are piercing into the door, and he has dedicated his life to getting what's inside. He even poisons one of his workers right after talking about his wife and kids. Man, talk about gaining cheap heat. As Sly gets close to the vault, Dr. M manages to stop him and capture him with this crazy mutation of an animal thing. But then, Sly starts to recollect his journey to get where he is now, thus leading the entire game to actually be a flashback. Now, something happens at the end of Sly 2, causing Bentley to be in a crippling accident and forcing him into a wheelchair, which causes Murray to blame himself, thus leaving the Cooper Gang to aspire for a more peaceful life. Sly ended up in jail, but there he meets Jim McSweeney, who was the muscle of his father's gang, and he informs Sly of Kane Island where the vault is located. It doesn't take long for him to learn that the island is being taken over by Dr. M, and realizes that he needs to assemble a world-class gang of thieves to break into the vault and stop the evil monkey. Now, one of the interesting things with the story is that it doesn't really have any sort of main crew that you're after this time around. The adventure takes place in the span of 6 different chapters, where you need to persuade a potential gang member by doing what they ask and taking down individual bad guys. So it's quite the different setup. First, there's Don Octavio, an opera singer turned mobster who plans on destroying Venice by sinking its landmarks, the Black Baron, the host of the Aces flying competition in Holland, General Tao, the self-appointed leader of the Kunlun Mountains in China, who aims to force a wedding with the returning Panda King's daughter, and Captain Le Fouet, the Scourge of the Seven Seas. It's another nice roundup of bad guys, and I gotta say, naming a rooster antagonist General Tao is pure genius. Just go to your local Chinese place and get some General Tao chicken, and you will agree with me. The main new twist with this game is just how damn big the Cooper Gang gets. Sly and Murray play practically the exact same way they did in Sly 2, and even though Bentley is now in a wheelchair, he controls very similarly too, aside from a sick new multi-jump giving him a lot more freedom this time around. And a cool addition to Bentley and Murray is that they can both finally pickpocket now as they couldn't before. And enemies also have a lot more coins and items you can steal from them, making pickpocketing as a whole a lot less tedious, which is nice. They each have another handful of different abilities they can purchase back at the safe house, along with a few different main moves. Like Bentley now uses Sly's alarm clock ability from Sly 2 to attract enemies, and Murray can use the aboriginal ball form move to roll around and bounce around the place like one of those cool little plastic balls you find in dollar stores. And now Sly can take advantage of different disguises that you can use to walk past guards with simple 4-button passwords. But now, aside from the 3 characters that we all know and love, there are now 5 more playable characters, totaling a whopping 8 characters. And that's not even counting the few instances of minigames. Sorta getting that weird feeling of deja vu. These characters are only playable via specific missions that you start up with the other main 3, and they are the Guru, Murray's spiritual teacher when he went on his new life quest, and his special power is the ability to blend in with the surroundings and possess different enemies, and the lack of an ability to speak any proper English, even though everyone else around him can understand him perfectly fine. Just hate when games do that. There's Penelope, the extremely brain-heavy and, quite frankly, pretty damn adorable mouse that Bentley meets via an online chat room, which is just hilarious, and you actually don't play as her. Instead, she takes over the different RC vehicles like the plane and the car, which is pretty much just what Bentley did in Band of Thieves. Then the Panda King from the first game returns, bringing his millions of explosives and fireworks, where you attack everything from a distance and blow everything up. Good old Dimitri returns as well, joining the crew for a total of 2 underwater missions where you play in this weird first-person view and shoot stuff underwater. They're honestly pretty lame, and I would actually hate them a lot more if Dimitri himself wasn't one of the greatest characters ever created. And lastly isn't a new member of the gang, but you finally get to play as Carmelita Fox a few times, where the game acts like a third-person shooter. And yeah, she has a totally different voice actress this time around too. And what do I think about this one? It's alright, I guess. The accent is done a lot better this time around. but man, she just sounds so dang nasally. I guess with Sucker Punch constantly hiring new voice actresses, they couldn't afford some decent cold medicine or something. But for the characters as a whole, just like Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon, I can't help but feel like all these extra characters are totally forced and unnecessary. Was an extra 5 really necessary? Carmelita's fun to control, Penelope is fine because she just takes control of the RC vehicles, but I can't stand controlling the Guru. Panda King's constant shooting is just tedious, and damn Dimitri, you know I love you, but you're pretty damn pointless here. Just give Penelope an RC submarine, and problem solved. This is just one of the instances of Sucker Punch adding too much where it clearly wasn't needed. Alright, well talking about all these extra characters was definitely quite the mouthful, but really, that is the only big difference this time around. Just like before, you're given a bunch of different open worlds to explore with a bunch of different missions that all serve the purpose of working towards one true goal. And the clue bottles from Band of Thieves are now gone, for better or for worse. But now there's a new feature that I'm sure a lot of people loved. While I didn't find it an issue in Sly 2, you didn't have the ability to replay through missions, which I can see people not really liking. But now in Sly 3, you can replay any mission you please, along with seeing the return of the Master Thief challenges, where you can play through missions with a different stipulation like a time limit or a health limit. When it comes to true changes though, that's really it, aside from there being like a lot more minigames. The gameplay concept is pretty much the exact same thing we've seen before, but there is a ton more variety thanks to the additional characters. But why is it I just can't enjoy this game as much as Band of Thieves? Well, for one, as I said before, all these different characters are just overkill. But then I also don't really care for the story that much. While I'm sorta okay with the more random adventure setup this time around, it doesn't compare to the story in Sly 2 that intertwined all the chapters together to make an epic overarching story. Here, once you beat a chapter, that's pretty much it except for getting a new gang member. And even though it's kinda cliche, I don't really mind the flashback story either. But the problem is, the entire purpose of opening the vault, you just sort of forget about not even halfway through the game. So when you get to the last chapter, it makes the final encounter feel pretty awkward and anticlimactic. Unfortunately finishing off with an ending that's even lamer than Sly 2. And I mean, come on, the main antagonist of Chapter 2 is a freaking evil mask. Really? And my last main complaint is the atmosphere. Again, something that was just nowhere near as well done as in Band of Thieves. Unlike Band of Thieves, you're constantly making yourself visible within the main crowd, whether it be talking to people directly, or just the whole aspect of constantly using costumes. I don't know, to me, when you do all that stuff, you kinda lose the feeling of being a thief exploring areas when and where you're not supposed to. Granted, this is obviously not a huge complaint, but when you make a sequel, you set your expectations from the previous game. And Honor Among Thieves simply does not do as good of a job as Band of Thieves. And the entirety of Chapter 5 is just lame. It's a chapter themed around pirates, which I would normally find amazing, because pirates are amazing, and they would be ninjas any day of the week, that's right, I said it. But there's this god-awful pirate ship controlling segment that feels like it just lasts forever and controls like outright trash. And there's also a sea battle game, which is just awful. It's just so out of place, why would you think that was a good idea? Sucker Punch also tried to force people into talking about this game a lot more at the time by for some reason adding a classic 3D red and blue glasses setup, which is just brutal and destroys the frame rate. Now in the Sly Collection on PS3, more modern 3D was brought in for the entire trilogy actually, but I've never used it whatsoever. And frankly, judging by other people's reviews for the collection, nobody else has either. And lastly, there are even 4 multiplayer games. I would go ahead and detail them because, you know, this is a review, but here's the thing. It's not like everybody loved the other Sly Cooper gangs but really hated the lack of multiplayer. This is just unnecessary filler. And good God almighty, there's a ship battle multiplayer game. Good. Now, I am no game developer, but I just can't understand this mindset of, okay, so let's do this. Let's squeeze out every idea we have left for everything it's worth, so people are sick of it by the time the credits roll. Which, hey, wouldn't matter to us, we're never gonna touch the series again anyway. Oh yay, marketing. Okay, so here's the deal with Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves. I just went through a good handful of what I find to be reasonable complaints I had, especially in comparison to Band of Thieves, but the thing is, it's still a pretty good game. The open world mission-based gameplay is still fun, and all the different character dynamics are still interesting and entertaining to watch, but here's the thing. Sly 1 and 2 had great stories, gameplay, and atmosphere, where in my opinion, Sly 3 lacks a compelling story and immersive atmosphere, and it's because of this that it's my least favorite in the trilogy. The story and atmosphere is still sorta there, don't get me wrong, it's just not as good as the other games. It's still worth playing through though, and that's the important part, especially since you should go through the first 2 in the first place. And I definitely know that there are those out there who have this as their favorite for the sake of gameplay variety alone. But to be honest, I expect more than just gameplay variety when it comes to my platformers, because in my mind, the excellent platformers are the ones that do more than just variety. But all that being said, the Sly Cooper trilogy is still an excellent one all around and is definitely worth experiencing even with the few little flaws spread throughout. It doesn't top the Ratchet & Clank trilogy as far as I'm concerned, because that's kinda top tier, but these are damn good regardless. But now that I've finally gotten all three of these games out of the way, it's finally time to celebrate the Raccoon's awesome return. After Honor Among Thieves, Sucker Punch moved on to the PS3 and created the Infamous series, which follows the trend of incredibly agile movement, and the games are pretty dang awesome because of it. But next time we meet, I'll be talking about the long-awaited sequel from a different company, Sanzaro Games, Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time. Hope you guys enjoyed the review and thanks for watching, and I will end off with the words of a great man. Let's dance!